The jewelry receipt was folded inside my late wife's address book, and the first thing I noticed was a name at the top, Laura Bennett, my wife. The second thing was the description, women's gold-filled bracelet, replaced broken safety chain, reinforced link beside missing bluebird charm. That bracelet had never belonged to Laura. It belonged to my best friend's wife, Marcy Doyle. I remembered the missing bluebird because I was there when it broke off at a 4th of July picnic in 1998. Marcy laughed when we searched the grass and finally said, "Leave it." Mom always said that bird was trying to escape anyway. The repair receipt was dated February of 2006. That was the year Laura and I nearly stopped speaking to each other. My name is Stephen Bennett. I was 67 when I found the receipt, 5 years after Laura died. I had retired from maintaining automatic doors in hospitals, supermarkets, and office buildings around Boise, Idaho. Most of my working life involved watching people assume a door was simple because it opened when they approached. Usually, when one failed, the real cause was somewhere people were not looking. The receipt came from Palmer Jewelry in Nampa. I remember the winter of 2006 clearly. Laura began disappearing on Tuesday evenings. She said she was helping with bookkeeping at our church. She took private calls in the laundry room. Twice, I woke after midnight and found her sitting at the kitchen table with the telephone beside her. At the time, I accepted every explanation. I was having problems of my own. My closest friend, Daniel Doyle, had just left a landscaping company he had built over 20 years, and I spent months worrying about him. Daniel told me Marcy had become distant. Laura told me marriages had private seasons. I thought she was defending Marcy. Now I was holding proof that my wife had secretly taken Marcy's bracelet to a jeweler. At the bottom of the receipt was a tiny handwritten note. Do not polish bird link. LB says leave the mark. I read it twice. Laura had wanted the damage preserved. I did not yet know why. Daniel and I had been friends since our 20s. We met on a commercial construction site outside Meridian. I was installing an automatic entrance. Daniel was laying irrigation lines. We got into an argument over which crew had blocked the loading area and ended the day eating burgers together. Our wives became friends because they had little choice. For years, the four of us camped, watched football, and took turns hosting Thanksgiving when nobody wanted to travel. Marcy's bracelet came from her mother. It was not expensive. Narrow gold-filled links, a little safety chain, and several enamel charms collected over the years. A tiny house, a red apple, a bluebird. The bird disappeared at our picnic. The empty link remained slightly twisted. That was why I recognized the repair description immediately. I called Palmer Jewelry. The owner from 2006 had retired, but his daughter and Palmer still worked there. She found an old paper ledger after I explained why I was asking. Yes, she said. Laura Bennett brought in a bracelet. Was she alone? And paused. No, another woman came with her. Marcy Doyle. I can't swear to a face from 20 years ago. She read the handwritten repair notes. One line had not appeared on my receipt copy. Customer requests class strong enough for daily wear. Do not restore missing charm. Owner wants it remembered as it is. Owner. That suggested Marcy had been there. I searched Laura's old calendars. Every Tuesday in February had a small letter P beside it. I had assumed prayer group. Palmer Jewelry was on Fairview Avenue. Then I found a grocery receipt from a coffee shop across the street on one of those Tuesdays. 2 coffees. I called Marcy. We had not spoken in nearly 8 years. She still lived in Boise. When I mentioned the bracelet, she went silent. Steve, she finally said, you should leave that alone. That's what everybody says when they already know the answer. Laura was trying to help me. With what? Another silence. Then Marcy asked, did Daniel ever tell you where he was on Tuesday nights that winter? I felt the room grow very still. Daniel had told me he was attending a small business retraining course. Laura, apparently, had known otherwise. Daniel Doyle was still alive. He lived outside Reno with his second wife. That fact had always sat awkwardly with me because he married less than 2 years after divorcing Marcy. The woman was not someone from our old circle. I never asked many questions. Daniel, and I had already become less close by then. I had blamed Marcy for much of that. Looking back, I did not enjoy admitting how easily I accepted his version of the divorce. He said Marcy had stopped trusting him. He said she searched his pockets and checked telephone bills. He said counseling turned every disagreement into evidence. I believed him because I knew him, or thought I did. I called him. After some small talk, I mentioned Palmer jewelry. He stopped speaking. Daniel, why are you digging into this? Because Laura had Marcy's bracelet. He sighed. Laura should have thrown that receipt away. That sentence told me enough. I asked whether he had been seeing someone else in 2006. No, Daniel, it wasn't what you're thinking. That is rarely a useful sentence. He admitted there had been a woman named Celia Grant who managed a nursery his company bought plants from. They had lunch together, then dinners. Then Daniel began telling Celia things he had stopped telling Marcy. He insisted it had not become physical. I did not ask for details. The distinction mattered less than he wanted it to. Did Marcy know? She suspected. Did Laura know? Yes. How? Marcy told her. I sat down at my workbench. All those Tuesday nights. Laura's private calls. The quiet kitchen after midnight. She had been helping Marcy while I sat in the next room, defending Daniel. I remembered one particular argument with Laura. I told her, Marcy has always been suspicious. Daniel deserves better than being treated like a criminal. Laura looked at me for a long time and said, "You don't know what she knows." I assumed she meant marriage was complicated. Now I understood she had been speaking literally. I asked Daniel why the bracelet needed repair. He said he did not know. Then he changed his answer. Actually, I do. His voice became quieter. She broke it the night she asked me whether I loved Celia. That was the first time the receipt stopped looking like evidence about Laura. It became evidence about what my best friend had done. Marcy agreed to meet me after I promised not to bring Daniel into it. We sat at a diner near the Boise River, where the four of us once ate breakfast after camping trips. She looked older, of course. So, did I. The strange part was how quickly I could see the woman she had been. I put the receipt on the table. She did not touch it. I wondered whether Laura kept that. Why would she? She kept things. She kept this from me. Marcy nodded. Yes. No excuse. That honesty made my anger sharper. She told me the bracelet broke during an argument at their house. Daniel had left a cell phone on the counter. A message from Celia appeared. Nothing explicit. Enough. Marcy confronted him. Daniel tried to leave the kitchen. Marcy caught her bracelet on a cabinet pull while reaching for phone. The safety chain snapped. The bracelet fell. The twisted link beside the missing bluebird opened wider. Marcy nearly threw it away. Laura stopped her. Why did Laura care? Because my mother gave it to me. That part one knew. What I had not known was that Marcy's mother wore the bracelet through her own divorce. She gave it to Marcy afterward and said, "Don't let one bad marriage make you think everything attached to it was bad." Marcy hated that sentence when she was young. In 2006, she suddenly understood it. Laura took the bracelet to Palmer Jewelry because Marcy could not stand walking into a store and explaining why it had broken. They went together for the pickup. Marcy asked the jeweler not to repair the twisted bird link completely. She wanted to remember. I asked. Marcy nodded. Not Daniel. The decision. What decision? To stop pretending nothing was wrong. Then she told me Laura had known about Celia for almost 4 months before I did. Not just suspicion. Daniel himself told her. He asked Laura to talk to Marcy for him. Instead, Laura told him to tell his wife the truth. He kept delaying. Laura kept his secret while supporting Marcy through the same secret. I stared at the woman across from me. My wife had stood between both sides of a marriage coming apart, and she had never told me any of it. I wanted to believe Laura's silence was simply loyalty to Marcy. Then I found something that made it harder. Inside the same address book as the receipt was a card from a marriage counselor in Boise. On the back, Laura had written, Marcy, Thursday at 4. Daniel, call after. Steve cannot know yet. That last line hurt. Not should not. Cannot. I called Marcy. What does she mean? You were Daniel's closest friend. That doesn't answer me. You had opinions. So, did everybody. Yours mattered to him. That was true. Daniel came to my garage almost every Saturday that winter. He complained about his marriage. I gave advice with the confidence of a man who had only heard half the story. I told him Marcy needed to stop interrogating him. I told him not to confess to feelings that had never become an affair. Once I said, if you admit to something you didn't actually do, she'll use it forever. Daniel listened. That was not pleasant to remember. Marcy said Laura knew about those conversations. Daniel told her. Why didn't she stop me? She tried. I remembered more than I wanted to. Laura once said, maybe Daniel needs less advice and more honesty. I became defensive. I told her men sometimes needed a friend who did not immediately assume the worst. She answered, and sometimes that friend makes it easier to avoid consequences. I slept in the guest room that night. At the time, I thought we were arguing about loyalty. We were, just not in the way I understood. Marcy said the counseling card came from the therapist she and Daniel eventually saw. Laura arranged the first appointment because neither would call. She didn't manipulate us into staying together, Marcy said. She got us into the same room. It did not save the marriage, but the counselor helped Daniel finally admit that Celia mattered to him in a way he had been minimizing. That was the first real turn in my understanding. Laura had lit. She had covered meetings and telephone calls. She had helped conceal Daniel's emotional betrayal from me, and she did it partly because she knew I was helping him avoid facing it. I had believed my wife excluded me because she trusted Marcy more. The evidence suggested something worse. She did not trust me to hear the truth fairly. I stayed angry for a while. Dead people are difficult to confront. They never interrupt. They never defend themselves badly enough to let you feel justified. I went through more of Laura's papers. There were no secret love letters, no dramatic confessions, mostly grocery lists and medical forms. Then I found a photograph from our garage in 2006. Daniel and I were standing beside my old Ford pickup. He had one arm around my shoulder. On the workbench behind us sat a cardboard box. I remembered the box. Daniel had stayed with us for 3 nights after Marcy asked him to leave. That detail had vanished from a cleaner story I told myself. Laura cooked for him, washed the sheets afterward, listened while I insisted Marcy had overreacted. Then she went out on Tuesday night and sat with Marcy. No wonder our own marriage felt strained. Laura was carrying both halves of the story I demanded she discuss only from Daniel's side. I called and at Palmer Jewelry again. What does the note after the repair mean? Which note? On my receipt, do not polish bird link. LB says leave the mark. And looked at the ledger. There's another notation beside it. What? She read it. SB story. My initials. Stephen Bennett. I felt a cold pressure in my chest. What does that mean? No idea. The repair order had been written by Anne's father, who was still alive but living in a memory care facility. She did not think he could explain. Marcy did not know either. Laura never mentioned your initials. That meant the one detail connecting me directly to the receipt had not come from Marcy. It came from Laura. I checked Laura's calendar for the repair date. Beside the small p was another notation. Ask Steve about Nora. Nora was my older sister. She had divorced her husband in 1993 after he had an affair. I had not spoken to him afterward. Not once. At the time, I called that loyalty. Laura apparently thought that old family story explained why she could not tell me about Daniel. And suddenly I knew exactly which conversation I needed to remember. My sister Nora was 72 and living in Twin Falls. When I asked about her divorce, she laughed without humor. That's reaching back. I need to know what I was like. You want a polite answer? No. You were furious. I remembered. Her husband, Jim, had admitted seeing another woman. Nora tried counseling for several months before ending the marriage. I could not understand why she gave him that chance. I told her cheating was a choice, not a symptom. I told her she took him back. She was teaching him there were no consequences. The marriage ended anyway. For years, I treated that as proof I had been right. Nora remembered something else. Laura defended her decision to try counseling. I told Laura, in front of both of them, there are some things you don't ask family to be neutral about. That was the sentence. Laura remembered it 13 years later when Daniel confessed his feelings for Celia. She called me, Nora said, when that winter, my wife had asked my sister what would happen if I learned Daniel was betraying Marcy emotionally. Nora told her I would cut Daniel off immediately, maybe permanently. And you think she hid it to protect him? Partly. What else? Nora hesitated. She was protecting you. I almost laughed. From what? From having to choose before Daniel had even chosen what kind of man he was going to be. That irritated me. Adults make choices. Consequences follow. Simple. That was exactly how I thought then. Laura saw something I did not. Daniel was already ashamed. Marcy was already furious. If I entered the situation early, my loyalty would become another force pushing them toward positions they might later regret. I would demand confession from Daniel. I would expect Marcy to leave. And if she did not, I might judge her too. Laura wanted the truth between husband and wife before it became a verdict delivered by everybody around them. My own certainty had helped create her secrecy, but it still did not explain my initials on the jewelry receipt. Nora said, maybe the bracelet does. That sounded too simple. Then she asked me whether I remembered seeing Marcy's mother wear it. I did. And that memory finally led somewhere I had not expected. Marcy's mother, Alice, had worn the bracelet to Nora's house once during the divorce. I remember because Alice and Laura came over with food after Nora had spent an entire day crying. The bluebird charm was still attached then. Alice sat at the kitchen table and told Nora about her own failed marriage. I was in the next room. I overheard enough to become irritated. Later, I told Laura, everybody keeps turning divorce into some journey. Sometimes somebody just does wrong and the marriage ends. Laura said, sometimes that's true. I replied, then stop making it complicated. Those words came back when Marcy showed me something she had kept. A small note Laura wrote on the day of the bracelet repair. Keep the bent link. Stephen remembers Alice wearing it at Nora's. Maybe someday he'll remember what she said too. That was the meaning of SB's story. Laura deliberately preserved the damaged link because the bracelet was connected not only to Marcy's marriage, but to my sister's. Alice had told Nora that night, you don't owe him another chance, but don't let your family decide whether you want to give one. Laura remembered. I had forgotten. That was the second truth. She was not simply hiding Daniel's behavior because she feared I would abandon my friend. She was trying to protect Marcy's right to decide what Daniel's betrayal meant before my loyalty and anger turned their marriage into a public trial. And she was trying to protect me from repeating what I had done with Nora. I loved my sister. I supported her. I also made her divorce partly about proving that I knew what self-respect should look like. Laura saw the same instinct waking up around Daniel and Marcy. So she kept me outside. That hurt. It still hurts. But now I understood why the receipt carried my initials. Laura intended, eventually, to tell me she wanted the bracelet itself to help explain. Then Daniel and Marcy separated for good. Daniel moved away. Marcy asked Laura never to reopen it with me because she was tired of being discussed. Laura agreed. The planned explanation became silence. The receipt remained because Laura could not bring herself to throw away the one piece that recorded what she had intended to say. Marcy still had the bracelet. She brought it when we met one final time at a park in Boise. The gold-filled surface was worn pale in places. The safety chain looked newer than the rest. And beside the empty space where the bluebird charm had once hung, the repaired link remained slightly crooked. Laura had asked the jeweler to make it strong, without making it look untouched. I understood that now. What happened with Daniel? I asked. Marcy looked across the grass. We tried for another year. Because of Laura? No. I was glad she said that. Daniel ended his relationship with Celia before counseling began. Marcy still could not trust him the same way. They learned how much resentment had built long before Celia. Eventually, they separated without another dramatic betrayal. Years later, they became civil. When Daniel's mother died, Marcy attended the funeral. That was about as much reconciliation as life gave them. I called Daniel afterward. We had a difficult conversation. I apologized for giving him advice that helped him minimize what he was doing. He said, "I like your advice because it made me feel innocent." Then he added, "That doesn't make it your fault." He was right. Laura's secrecy was not my fault either, but I had helped make honesty expensive. That distinction matters to me. Marcy offered me the bracelet. I refused. "It's yours." She touched the crooked link. "It always was." I kept the repair receipt. It is framed now in a narrow wooden frame on the shelf above my desk. At first, that faded paper looked like evidence against my wife. Her name, another woman's bracelet, secret meetings during a bad year in our marriage. I thought it might prove Laura had been protecting somebody at my expense. In a way, it did. She protected Marcy's dignity. She protected Daniel from my judgment long enough for him to tell his own truth. She protected me from becoming a weapon in somebody else's marriage. And she paid for those choices by lying to me. I do not turn that into sainthood. I wish she had trusted me more. I also wish I had been easier to trust with complicated things. Near the bottom of the receipt, the ink has faded around the words, "Leave the mark." That is the part one notice now. Laura did not ask the jeweler to make Marcy's bracelet look new. She asked him to make it usable without erasing where it had broken. After 20 years, that feels less like a repair instruction. It feels like the closest thing she left me to an explanation.